There was something about your hand, the quiet strength of your fingers, the gentle warmth of your palm, that made me forget, just for a heartbeat, the coldness of the waiting room and the quiet hum of bad news hanging in the air. I didn't know your name, nor did you know mine. Yet in that 2-minute eternity, when the doctor's words blurred around me, your touch anchored me softly to something steady. It's strange, isn't it? How someone we barely meet can leave fingerprints on our souls deeper than those we've known for years. Have you ever felt this? This quiet connection with a stranger that stays with you forever, whispering gently, "What if we'd met differently, at another time?" Perhaps you too remember me tonight. Perhaps you're watching this. If so, tell me. Do you remember the way our hands fit perfectly, if only briefly? Emma Mitchell lived in a modest cottage tucked at the edge of a quiet coastal town in Massachusetts, where the air always smelled faintly of salt and wild lavender. From the outside, her life appeared serene, pleasantly ordinary. Days spent working quietly as a librarian, evenings tending a garden of fragile blooms. Her small porch held a weathered rocking chair, worn smooth from countless solitary evenings spent watching the twilight slip gently into darkness, the horizon turning, shades of violet and amber. Yet beneath this quiet exterior, Emma carried a silent weight, an ache comprised of subtle regrets and unspoken words. Her marriage had ended gently, quietly dissolving like sugar in tea, leaving no dramatic heartbreak, only a lingering emptiness she couldn't quite define. At 47, she often wondered how her life might have been different had she dared speak truths rather than tuck them carefully into letters never sent, hidden deep within a small blue notebook beside her bed. Most nights, she'd sit at her kitchen table, sipping tea from the chipped porcelain cup that once belonged to her grandmother, listening to the gentle hum of an old radio always tuned to a station playing songs from the 90s, soft echoes of a younger, braver Emma. She loved these quiet rituals, yet each familiar melody sometimes felt more like gentle hauntings, reminders of moments she'd let slip through her fingers, lost forever to silence and hesitation. She rarely spoke about these quiet griefs, though they hummed persistently beneath the tranquil surface of her days. Her friends and neighbors saw a woman steady and calm, yet only Emma knew the quiet turmoil beneath, the dreams she dismissed with a practiced smile, and the gentle courage it took simply to carry on. Occasionally, as she walked along the rocky beach, Emma would pause and look out over the endless sea, whispering softly to herself, "What would happen if I let someone truly see inside my heart again?" Maybe tonight, as you listen to this story, you understand this feeling, this delicate balance between appearing fine and quietly yearning to be known. If you do, please tell me. Have you ever felt truly seen by someone? Or are you, like me, still waiting quietly for that moment? The phone call had come late, after Emma had already settled into bed, a novel opened carelessly across her lap. Her father's caregiver's voice, gentle but edged with urgency, made her heart quicken with dread. The drive to the hospital felt dreamlike. Headlights blurred against the rainy windshield, street lamps turning into halos of diffused amber, marking her slow progress towards something she sensed, deep in her bones, she wasn't ready for. Entering the small emergency waiting room, she noted immediately how the fluorescent lights seemed harsher, their buzzing louder in the stillness. She took a seat at the far end, beside a tall window streaked with rain, drawing her cardigan tighter against the chill. The room held the unmistakable scent of disinfectant mixed with faint traces of despair. Across from her, seated quietly, was a man she hadn't noticed at first, his face partially hidden behind a worn baseball cap, eyes fixed thoughtfully on the linoleum floor. They shared a brief glance, nodding slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared solitude in that moment. Minutes passed heavily, Emma's anxiety a steady drumbeat beneath her calm facade. Memories of her father surfaced gently yet insistently, his laughter warm and rich, his endless patience teaching her to sail as a child, always patient, always kind, even after illness had stolen most of his strength. She wished she had stayed longer the last time she'd visited, said more than her usual polite reassurances, perhaps even lingered a moment longer in his hug. Instead, she'd let routine and responsibilities pull her away, assuming tomorrow would arrive predictably, as it always had. A quiet rustle beside her drew her back to the present. The stranger had shifted slightly, sensing perhaps her rising distress. Before she could gather her thoughts or look away, he raised his head and met her eyes briefly, his expression quietly compassionate, as if he knew exactly how she felt without her saying a word. Embarrassed, she offered a fleeting smile before turning away, pretending interest in an outdated magazine resting on a table nearby. When footsteps finally echoed along the corridor, Emma's heart raced again, her palms suddenly clammy. The young doctor entered, his face composed into a careful neutrality she instantly recognized as masking news no one wished to deliver. She rose automatically, though her legs trembled slightly, uncertainty prickling at her spine. Her breath grew shallow, eyes searching the doctor's face for clues as he spoke softly yet firmly, each word piercing through the numbness slowly enveloping her. "We did everything we could. I'm so sorry." It felt like the room had tilted, sound draining abruptly from the space around her, replaced only by the quiet hum of disbelief. Emma swayed slightly, her vision narrowing, tears prickling hotly behind her eyes, though she stubbornly refused to let them fall. Then, in that suspended moment of devastating clarity, something unexpected happened. She felt warmth, gentle, comforting, encase her trembling hand. Without looking down, she knew it belonged to the stranger beside her, who had reached out instinctively, quietly anchoring her to the present, offering the simplest, purest human comfort. She didn't pull away, didn't resist the quiet gesture, feeling instead an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the simple kindness offered so effortlessly, even without knowing her name or her story. His touch was gentle, yet solid, a lifeline she hadn't known she needed until now. Emma drew a slow, trembling breath, her chest rising and falling with the effort of containing grief that threatened to spill out in sobs she refused to release here, in front of strangers, in this room filled with fluorescent shadows. She squeezed back slightly, silently thanking him for this tiny, crucial connection. Her eyes remained fixed on a spot on the floor, noticing for the first time the cracks in the linoleum, each imperfection suddenly important, memorized forever in this defining moment. After what felt like both seconds and a lifetime, Emma finally found the strength to whisper, "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible, breaking softly in the silent space between them. The stranger nodded gently, offering no words, only a calm understanding shining in his eyes. When she finally glanced up again, she noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the quiet sadness etched into the corners of his lips. He understood grief too, she realized, perhaps even more deeply than she'd initially perceived. His steady presence was like a quiet promise that she wasn't alone in her pain. Moments later, footsteps echoed softly again, breaking the fragile connection as a nurse approached, carrying paperwork, speaking gentle, sympathetic words Emma barely heard. The stranger slowly released her hand, the absence of warmth immediate, unsettling. She signed papers mechanically, exchanged polite nods and quiet words, and watched numbly as the nurse retreated, leaving her alone once more with the stranger, whose name she still didn't know. Emma glanced at him, suddenly shy, feeling oddly exposed by this brief intimacy shared. She managed a faint, sad smile, the kind reserved for shared sorrow, whispered again softly, "I don't even know your name." He paused, as if considering something important, before softly answering, "Maybe it's better that way." His voice was warm, calm, reassuring. Emma nodded quietly, strangely accepting the subtle truth of his words. As she stood to leave, legs still uncertain beneath her, she realized how strange life was. That a single act of quiet kindness from a stranger could gently fracture the careful isolation she'd built around her heart. Stepping slowly toward the door, she paused, glancing back once, catching the faintest glimpse of his profile, steady, thoughtful, and already distant again. She wondered fleetingly if she'd ever see him again, if their paths might cross elsewhere, in gentler circumstances, before pushing the thought away, tucking it carefully behind the fresh grief now blooming gently in her heart. And as Emma stepped out into the softly falling rain, grief mingling quietly with newfound curiosity, she couldn't help but wonder if he would remember this night as vividly as she surely would. Perhaps, in another life or another time, she'd have asked for his name. Perhaps tonight, listening to this quiet confession, you might understand exactly how Emma feels. And if so, tell me gently. Have you ever had a stranger quietly change your life in ways you never expected? It had been nearly 2 weeks since the night at the hospital, yet Emma found herself caught in quiet reflections of that moment more often than she cared to admit. Returning to work at the town's small library provided comforting normalcy, though her father's absence still lingered in subtle, aching ways. In the empty voicemail box of her phone, in the silent moments between patrons, and in the photographs on her desk, she now hesitated to glance at directly. On a particularly quiet Thursday afternoon, sunlight streaming softly through dusty library windows, Emma busied herself organizing returned books. The rhythmic, mundane task calmed her mind, filling the silence with gentle purpose. As she reached to reshelve an old volume, something caught her eye. A forgotten box tucked discreetly behind a row of rarely touched historical texts. Curiosity stirred quietly within her as she lifted it carefully, setting it down on a nearby table to peer inside. Inside the faded cardboard box were yellowed papers, volunteer logs, old photographs from years past, a small archive of memories long untouched. Emma sifted gently through the pages, smiling softly at images of community events and faces vaguely familiar. She recognized some patrons, colleagues who had long since retired, and locals whose stories she knew by heart. Her hand paused on a particular photo that appeared slightly newer than the others, edges still crisp, though clearly a few years had passed. Her breath caught slightly. There, standing beside the old oak checkout counter where Emma herself now sat daily, was the man from the hospital waiting room. He looked younger here, his smile subtle but genuine, eyes bright with an openness she hadn't fully glimpsed that night at the hospital. Emma's pulse quickened in surprise, fingers tightening unconsciously around the photograph, as if holding tighter might somehow make sense of this unexpected discovery. Flipping the image over carefully, she saw neat handwriting in pencil. Michael. Hartwell. Volunteer event, Summer Reading Program, 2017. The handwriting belonged to Grace, the library's previous head librarian, now retired, known to Emma as meticulous and reserved. Emma frowned slightly, wondering how she'd never encountered Michael here before. Though she had started working at the library in early 2018, it seemed strange she'd never heard his name mentioned by colleagues who delighted in retelling old library stories. Driven by a quiet, insistent curiosity, Emma leafed through the rest of the box, uncovering further details about the man who had quietly comforted her. Volunteer records revealed that Michael had been a regular, always dependable, frequently praised for his gentle nature, especially beloved by elderly patrons and children alike. A soft ache built steadily within Emma's chest as she pieced together fragments of a life she'd unknowingly been living parallel to, never intersecting until that fateful night when he'd silently reached out. Sitting back heavily in the chair, Emma stared out the library window, her mind swirling gently. With newfound understanding, she wondered quietly at the paths our lives take. How two people living within the small confines of the same town could somehow avoid meeting until one painful, pivotal moment forced their worlds together. Emma closed her eyes briefly, savoring the quiet realization that this man, Michael Hartwell, had not been entirely a stranger after all, though the exact reason their paths had never crossed remained a gentle mystery. She felt suddenly grateful for the small-town library, this humble archive of community lives and quiet stories, each paper and photograph a gentle testament to moments of connection and belonging. A part of her wished she'd known Michael earlier, perhaps during one of these ordinary afternoons, sharing polite nods and quiet conversations over the scent of old paperbacks and freshly brewed tea from the staff kitchenette. Lost in thought, Emma barely registered the quiet footsteps approaching until Grace's voice softly interrupted her reverie. "Finding something interesting, dear?" Emma glanced up, startled slightly from her musings, and offered Grace a warm smile. The older woman had stopped by occasionally since retirement, her visits always welcome, often offering gentle wisdom and subtle companionship during long, quiet shifts. Emma hesitated briefly before carefully handing Grace the photograph. "Grace, do you remember him? Michael Hartwell?" Grace's expression softened instantly, nostalgia and quiet sadness flickering gently across her face. "Of course I do. He volunteered here for several years. Lovely man, quiet, kind, kept mostly to himself, but always willing to help." Grace paused thoughtfully, her gaze distant. "He stopped coming after losing someone dear to him. A brother, I think. It was sudden, tragic. He never returned after that, though I heard he still lives nearby." Emma nodded softly, understanding now the quiet sadness she'd glimpsed in Michael's eyes that night at the hospital, sensing a shared pain neither had voiced, yet both silently recognized. "I saw him recently at the hospital," she confessed, softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The night my father died." Grace reached out, gently squeezing Emma's hand in quiet sympathy. "I'm sorry, Emma. Losing a parent changes you. But sometimes, in those moments, we find comfort in unexpected places, don't we?" Emma smiled faintly, feeling a gentle warmth spread through her at Grace's words, at the quiet truth of them. "He held my hand," she murmured, almost more to herself than to Grace. "Just for a moment. He didn't say a word, yet somehow it meant everything." Grace studied her warmly, knowingly, before quietly responding. "Life has a strange way of bringing people together exactly when they need it most. Maybe meeting Michael was meant to remind you, and perhaps him too, that none of us are ever truly alone, even when it feels like it." Emma's eyes filled slightly at the gentle wisdom offered, nodding softly as Grace squeezed her hand once more before moving quietly away, leaving Emma again with her thoughts, richer and deeper than before. Alone again, Emma gazed thoughtfully at Michael's photograph, sensing a gentle shift inside her, one that quietly whispered possibilities rather than endings. And in that quiet afternoon light, surrounded by the comforting presence of stories both written and unwritten, Emma softly wondered if Michael, too, had felt something meaningful in their fleeting moment. Had he remembered her afterward, wondering who she was and why their paths had crossed precisely when they did? Perhaps tonight, listening quietly to her reflections, you might wonder as well. Have you ever discovered an unexpected connection to someone you thought was merely passing through your life? Emma carefully placed the photograph back into the box, heart slightly lighter, a gentle curiosity blooming warmly within her, marking the quiet beginning of something she had yet to fully comprehend. She had no way of knowing that this gentle discovery was only the first thread in a deeper story, one she couldn't yet see, but one that would change everything. She never expected the truth would begin with that photograph. In the quiet weeks that followed her gentle discovery in the library archives, Emma found herself drawn again and again toward memories she'd long tried to keep tucked away. Each night, sitting by the soft glow of her reading lamp, her small, blue notebook open before her. She wrote letters. Letters never intended to be sent, but simply written as quiet conversations with those she missed, those she regretted never fully knowing. Now, inexplicably, Michael Hartwell's image gently wove itself among those silent recipients, becoming a fixture in her evening rituals, a quiet mystery she found herself returning to. One rainy Saturday morning, as mist hovered delicately above the seaside town, Emma found herself once more lingering by the window of her cottage, tea in hand, contemplating the gentle ache inside her chest. It was the same gentle, persistent ache she'd known often in her life, familiar yet still surprising in its depth. Deciding to clear her head, she slipped into her coat, grabbed her umbrella, and stepped outside, breathing in deeply the clean, crisp air mixed with sea spray and rain. Her walk took her through the quiet town square, past familiar shops and cafe windows steamed slightly from inside warmth. Emma paused, almost without thinking, before a cozy bookstore nestled neatly between an antiques shop and the bakery. She hesitated only briefly before stepping inside, drawn as always by the scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee. Wandering slowly through aisles lined with shelves, her fingers traced gently along worn spines of familiar novels, feeling comfort in their presence. At the back of the store, near a quiet reading corner filled with plush armchairs, a bulletin board held notes, photographs, and flyers about local happenings. Emma's eyes skimmed absently until one small announcement caught her attention, causing her heart to gently catch. There, pinned casually beside notices for gardening clubs and bake sales, was a faded photograph of Michael Hartwell. Beneath, his image was a short handwritten note, "Local History Talk, Stories from Our Harbor, presented by Michael Hartwell. Monthly gathering at Grace's Cafe, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Emma's breath stilled slightly, heart fluttering softly. This gentle nudge of fate felt both comforting and intimidating, offering quietly the possibility she'd been subconsciously seeking, a chance to know him, if only from a distance, to understand who this man truly was beyond the compassionate stranger she'd briefly encountered. Her quiet reverie was gently interrupted by a soft voice behind her, familiar and warm. "Emma?" Turning slowly, she recognized Evelyn, Dorothy's daughter, and one of her dearest friends, smiling softly at her from beneath her damp coat. Evelyn's cheerful presence immediately eased Emma's tension, her easy warmth a quiet reminder of the comforting threads binding her to this town. "I didn't expect to see you here today," Evelyn said gently, stepping closer. Her eyes flicked briefly to the notice Emma had been staring at, her expression subtly shifting to gentle curiosity. "Oh, Michael Hartwell. I've heard his talks before. Very interesting man, though he always seems a little quiet, I suppose." Emma nodded softly, surprised by the gentle relief she felt at Evelyn's casual validation. Gathering courage from her friend's presence, she murmured quietly, "Have you ever actually talked to him?" Evelyn considered thoughtfully, before shaking her head gently, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "Not really. He's the sort of man who listens more than he speaks, you know. But sometimes I think those are exactly the people who have the most interesting stories hidden inside them." Emma smiled softly, heart warmed by her friend's gentle wisdom, wondering quietly if perhaps this was exactly the encouragement she needed, if perhaps this quiet connection to Michael was more than mere coincidence. Later that evening, back in her quiet cottage, Emma sat curled on the sofa, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window creating a gentle backdrop to her thoughts. Evelyn's words lingered softly in her mind, reminding her that life's greatest regrets often came not from what she had done, but from the things she'd quietly avoided out of fear or uncertainty. Her fingers brushed lightly over the photograph she'd discreetly snapped of Michael's flyer, now displayed softly on her phone's screen. The decision hung quietly between the safe comfort of solitude she had always known and the gentle, unknown path toward connection. Her thoughts drifted back quietly to her marriage with David, which had ended so softly it seemed more like a gentle fading than a dramatic conclusion. There had been love, certainly, but also an invisible wall, built slowly by all the small conversations they'd avoided, the quiet disappointments they'd chosen never to voice. Emma knew now, sitting alone years later, that silence could carve out distance more profound than harsh words ever could. Restless with her thoughts, she rose and walked to her small writing desk, pulling gently from its drawer the faded blue notebook that held her unsent letters to David, to her father, and now quietly, inevitably, to Michael. Her pen hovered over the blank page for several heartbeats before she began writing softly, words coming easily, truthfully. Dear Michael, it feels strange writing your name, since I know it only from photographs and quiet whispers around town. Maybe you've forgotten already the quiet woman whose hand you held in a hospital waiting room late one night, but I haven't forgotten you. Sometimes I wonder if moments like those are ever truly accidental, or if they're gently placed into our lives. Quiet reminders that we aren't meant to navigate this world alone. I'm not sure I have the courage to meet you again intentionally, to attend one of your history talks at Grace's Cafe, to approach you and reveal myself as that woman from the waiting room. But I want you to know, even if you never read these words, that your kindness reached somewhere deep inside me, a place long hidden by caution and regret. It reminded me that connection, even brief, can quietly heal places within us we never realized needed healing. Emma stopped, pen still held, gently in midair, wondering quietly at the vulnerability pouring easily onto paper. Her heart felt lighter, yet the quiet fear of rejection or misunderstanding still lingered, reminding her sharply of the careful walls she'd spent years building around herself. Closing the notebook gently, Emma placed it back inside the drawer, her heart feeling softly exposed yet strangely liberated. Perhaps writing these unsent letters was enough, a quiet act of bravery, even if no one else ever knew. But even as she considered this, a gentle voice within whispered that it wasn't truly enough, not this time. Perhaps now she needed something more than quiet letters hidden away. Perhaps this quiet yearning required action, real and tangible. Sitting back quietly in her chair, Emma gazed softly out the rain-streaked window into the darkness, the distant flicker of the lighthouse beam cutting rhythmically through the night. Her mind drifted gently toward the memories of sailing with her father years ago, the gentle guidance of his voice, always encouraging her quietly to take risks, to trust in life's unpredictable currents, rather than fighting against them. Subtle resolve settled within her heart, a gentle but firm decision to do something small yet meaningful, to quietly step forward into the unknown rather than continuing to linger safely on life's quiet sidelines. She felt quietly certain now that she would attend Michael's next talk at Grace's Cafe, not to force a dramatic meeting, but simply to quietly place herself in the gentle path of possibility. She would listen, perhaps say nothing, but she would be there, offering silently the gentle courage she'd denied herself too many times before. The following Thursday evening arrived softly, twilight gently washing the streets of the town in shades of lavender and soft orange. Emma moved quietly down familiar pathways, her heartbeat quickened subtly, a gentle mixture of anticipation and apprehension stirring beneath her calm exterior. She wore a simple sweater, choosing comfort over formality, quietly reassuring herself that tonight was nothing more than an ordinary community gathering, that nothing needed to happen beyond quiet observation. Grace's Cafe was warm and welcoming, filled gently with the comforting scent of brewed coffee and freshly baked pastries. Emma took a seat toward the back, tucked quietly into a corner, partially hidden behind other guests. Her eyes moved softly across the faces gathered, neighbors and friends, each chatting quietly, sharing smiles and gentle greetings. Emma felt a brief, tender pang of envy toward their easy connections, wondering softly if they ever felt the quiet loneliness she carried daily beneath her calm facade. When Michael finally stepped forward, standing humbly before the group with gentle confidence. Emma's heart tightened quietly. He was exactly as she remembered, his presence quiet yet solid, his voice warm and calming as he began sharing stories, gentle tales of the town's history, of forgotten shipwrecks and courageous fishermen, of storms weathered quietly by ancestors who had shaped this quiet place by the sea. His storytelling was soft and understated, yet deeply compelling. Emma found herself gently captivated, discovering quiet layers of a man she'd barely met, yet felt strangely connected to. Listening quietly from her secluded spot, Emma noticed small details she hadn't seen clearly before. The soft sadness hidden carefully behind Michael's warm eyes, the gentle hesitation that occasionally flickered across his features, as though he, too, felt quietly uncertain, vulnerable beneath his calm exterior. It was comforting, in a gentle, unexpected way, to glimpse quietly the humanity behind the composed facade he'd presented at the hospital. Emma felt a quiet kinship with him, recognizing softly the same quiet struggles mirrored in herself. As Michael's presentation ended, gentle applause rippled softly around the cafe. Emma stayed quietly seated, debating internally whether to approach him or simply slip out unnoticed, content quietly knowing him better from afar. Yet, as guests dispersed and Michael moved quietly among them, exchanging gentle thanks and soft conversation, something within Emma shifted quietly. A gentle yet undeniable urge to speak, to connect, even if only briefly. Heart fluttering gently, Emma rose slowly, stepping quietly closer. Michael turned, sensing her presence even before she spoke. His eyes widened softly with subtle surprise, then recognition quickly replaced it, warmth gently flooding his expression. "It's you," he said softly, voice warm, filled quietly with gentle wonder. Emma smiled faintly, quietly reassured by his gentle openness. "I'm Emma," she offered softly, voice nearly a whisper, suddenly shy yet strangely unafraid. Michael nodded gently, his expression thoughtful, quietly appreciative. "Emma," he repeated softly, as if quietly committing her name, carefully to memory. "I wondered if I'd see you again, though I wasn't sure if it was right to ask around." Emma felt quietly touched by his hesitant honesty, her heart softening further toward him. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted gently, "but seeing your flyer, it felt like something quiet nudging me forward." Michael's gentle smile widened, slightly, eyes warm yet cautious, as though he understood quietly exactly how difficult such steps could be. "I'm glad it did," he finally said softly, sincerity clear in his gentle gaze. They stood quietly for several heartbeats, silence between them comfortable, filled softly with gentle understanding. Then Michael spoke again quietly, his voice subtly hesitant yet hopeful. "Would you like to sit down for a bit? Maybe talk a little more?" Emma's breath caught gently, suddenly aware of the quiet crossroads she faced now, between quietly retreating back into safe familiarity, or gently embracing this quiet possibility of something more meaningful, something deeply human and quietly real. She hesitated softly, heart suspended between past disappointments and gentle courage. But within the silence of her hesitation, Emma already felt softly certain of the choice she would make, even as it gently frightened her. Taking a quiet breath, Emma nodded gently, her voice softly resolute. "Yes, I'd like that." They found a small, quiet table by the window, the cafe now nearly empty, softly illuminated by warm lamplight and the gentle glow of the evening street lamps outside. As they sat, an easy silence settled comfortably around them, each quietly, absorbing the significance of this small, unexpected moment. Michael spoke first, his voice gentle and sincere. "I thought about that night at the hospital more times than you can imagine. It felt strange, holding the hand of someone I didn't know. Yet somehow, it felt important." Emma smiled softly, her fingers tracing patterns absently on the wooden tabletop. It felt important to me, too. I'm not sure I've ever properly thanked you for being there, for making that night a little less lonely. He shook his head gently, eyes softening. You don't need to thank me, Emma. If anything, I should thank you. It made me realize. He hesitated softly, gaze drifting thoughtfully toward the window, then returning quietly to her. That I've spent too long keeping myself separate, holding back from connection. Seeing your grief, being there in that moment, it reminded me how fragile and precious each interaction can be. Emma's heart stirred gently at his quiet admission, recognizing in his words an echo of her own silent struggles. Her voice was soft when she finally responded, carefully vulnerable. I understand that more than you know. I've spent years quietly convincing myself that solitude was safer, that avoiding risks meant avoiding pain. But lately, I've begun to realize that living that way quietly takes something vital from us too. Something we might never even notice until it's already gone. Michael nodded gently, his gaze holding hers warmly. Exactly. Maybe we both needed to see that clearly. Maybe that's why we met as we did. They continued quietly, softly exchanging small, gentle fragments of their lives, gradually revealing careful glimpses into their hidden worlds. Emma learned quietly about Michael's brother, the sudden loss that had shifted the direction of his life, and his cautious steps toward rebuilding afterward. She shared, too, soft pieces of her own story, her quiet regrets about things left unsaid with her father, her marriage that ended not in anger, but gentle, heartbreaking silence. As their conversation deepened gently, Emma realized with quiet astonishment that she had never before spoken so honestly, so openly, about the private griefs that defined her life. Michael, in his quiet strength and gentle listening, gave her space to speak without fear or reservation. In his presence, she felt quietly seen in a way she'd longed for but never quite believed possible. The evening outside darkened slowly, unnoticed, as their connection quietly bloomed within the warmth of the cafe. Emma felt quietly grateful, yet beneath her newfound joy lingered a gentle undercurrent of fear, the familiar whisper cautioning her softly not to trust too quickly, not to risk vulnerability again. As their conversation softly lulled, Michael regarded her thoughtfully, sensing perhaps her quiet hesitance. He smiled gently, understanding. I know this isn't easy. It's not for me either. But maybe it's not supposed to be easy. Maybe it's supposed to matter enough to feel this vulnerable. Emma's chest tightened gently at his words, sensing their quiet truth deeply. Maybe you're right, she whispered softly, heart suddenly uncertain again. Quietly conflicted, she wondered gently if the risk of losing what they had now, a quiet, safe friendship, was worth the uncertain promise of something more. She knew that tonight marked a subtle turning point, a quiet crossroads between safely holding back and bravely stepping forward. The choice loomed gently, poignantly, ahead. Emma took a slow, steadying breath, heart suspended quietly in anticipation, knowing clearly that whatever she chose next would quietly shape not just her connection with Michael, but the quiet shape of her own heart's future. Life is about the second chances we choose to take. Days melted gently into weeks, each quiet interaction with Michael adding soft layers of intimacy and trust between them. Emma found herself softly drawn toward him, carefully allowing their friendship to unfold naturally, yet sensing quietly, beneath each gentle exchange an unspoken depth neither dared fully explore. She felt quietly content, though subtle apprehension lingered, a gentle warning not to risk too much, not yet. One mild afternoon, Emma sorted gently through old books donated to the library. The task was comforting in its monotony, each book holding quiet promise, each one softly whispering its own gentle history. Near the bottom of the worn cardboard box A small, faded, leather-bound journal caught her attention. Curious, she opened it gently, the cover stiff beneath her fingers. A photograph fell softly from between the pages onto her lap. Emma picked it up carefully, breath hitching quietly in surprise. The photo was old, edges slightly curled, colors faded to gentle sepia tones. Two young men stood side by side on a familiar beach, smiles carefree, arms casually slung around each other's shoulders. Her chest tightened softly in recognition. One of the faces was unmistakably Michael's, younger and brighter, eyes unshadowed by the quiet grief she knew now. And standing beside him, smiling just as brightly, was a face Emma recognized instantly, though she'd never expected to see it beside Michael's. It was David, her former husband. Emma's heart pounded gently yet urgently as questions bloomed quietly, painfully, within her mind. Carefully turning the photo over, she found words penned softly in familiar handwriting. David's handwriting. Michael and me. Best friends. Summer '95. A wave of quiet shock rippled softly through Emma, the gentle implications slowly unraveling within her heart. David had mentioned a dear friend lost long ago, a friendship gently faded by distance, miscommunications, and quiet regret. Emma had never pressed, sensing quietly that the loss had been deeply personal. Now, realizing softly that Michael was that lost friend, the gentle, painful irony struck her clearly. They had been connected softly for years without knowing it, linked gently through someone they'd both loved and quietly lost. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the journal, carefully skimming through David's faded handwriting, the gentle loops and strokes achingly familiar. She had thought she knew him completely, yet here, hidden quietly between pages, lay emotions he'd never revealed openly. David had written about Michael often, quiet entries filled with gentle regret and heartfelt apologies, longing quietly to repair a friendship he deeply valued, yet had quietly let drift away. Reading slowly, Emma felt a quiet grief for David, recognizing in his gentle words the same hesitant fear of vulnerability she'd quietly battled within herself. Their marriage had ended softly, gently, without confrontation. But perhaps their quiet avoidance of difficult truths had been the very thing that drove them quietly apart. Emma's chest ached softly, understanding now how deeply silence could wound, how carefully hidden words could quietly shape entire lives without ever being spoken. Reaching one final entry, Emma's breath stilled gently. Written shortly before their marriage ended, David's words were softly heartbreaking, filled quietly with quiet realizations. Emma deserves more than someone who hides behind silence. If only I'd learned this sooner. From Michael, from myself. Maybe I wouldn't be losing her now. Emma closed the journal gently, tears softly blurring her vision, heart aching quietly with understanding and sorrow. David had recognized quietly their slow unraveling, yet had remained silent out of fear. And now, with gentle irony, Michael had quietly returned to her life, embodying quietly the very truth they'd both struggled so softly to understand. She knew now, with gentle clarity, that the careful silence she'd always chosen was no longer enough. Emma needed answers, from Michael, from herself. Quietly resolute, heart pounding gently, she rose, knowing softly that confronting this truth would change everything. That evening, the sky darkened slowly, clouds settling gently over the town, hinting softly at approaching rain. Emma stood at her kitchen window, journal clasped gently in hand, her mind softly swirling with questions and quiet apprehension. She knew that confronting Michael about David, about this quietly shared history, meant stepping fully into vulnerability, exposing softly hidden layers of herself she'd carefully guarded. Yet something deep within quietly insisted it was time to face this, to no longer let silence dictate her path. Gathering quiet courage, Emma wrapped herself in a soft cardigan, stepping carefully outside as gentle raindrops began tapping softly onto the street. She walked slowly, heart quietly trembling in her chest, toward Michael's home, located a short distance away along the familiar coast road. The ocean murmured gently beside her, waves whispering softly against the shore, seeming quietly aware of her internal struggle. Reaching his cottage, Emma hesitated softly at the door, her heart beating gently but insistently beneath her calm exterior. She knocked softly, then stood waiting quietly, uncertain yet determined. When Michael opened the door, surprise flickered gently in his eyes, quickly replaced by quiet warmth. "Emma," he greeted softly, smiling gently yet sensing her subtle unease. "Come inside." She followed quietly into the cozy living room, noting softly the warmth of his home, bookshelves filled neatly, framed photographs scattered gently across walls. She wondered quietly how many quiet truths lay hidden behind these carefully curated scenes. Noticing her quiet tension, Michael paused gently, eyes filled softly with concern. "Is something wrong?" Emma hesitated softly, fingers brushing nervously against David's journal, before quietly speaking, voice gently fragile yet firm. "I need to ask you about someone, Michael. About David Mitchell." Michael's expression stilled softly, a quiet shadow passing gently across his features. He nodded slowly, understanding quietly dawning in his eyes. "David Mitchell," he repeated softly, sadness quietly threading through his voice. "Yes, I knew David. Years ago, we were close friends." Emma felt quietly grateful for his gentle honesty, even as it opened softly old wounds she'd barely known existed. "David was my husband," she whispered quietly, voice barely audible yet, filled with quiet significance. "We divorced years ago, peacefully, quietly. But today, sorting through old donations at the library, I found something. Your photograph, with David, from years ago. And this journal—" Her voice faltered softly as she held the journal carefully toward him, offering quietly the painful evidence of a past neither had fully reconciled. Michael took the journal gently, eyes softening with quiet recognition. He ran his fingers lightly over the worn cover, memories washing quietly across his features. "I haven't seen this in years," he murmured softly, voice thick with quiet emotion. "David and I, we lost touch after a misunderstanding. Something so small, looking back, yet it seemed so significant at the time." Pride and silence took hold quietly, neither of us brave enough to reach out first. By the time I understood how foolish it was, years had passed, and reconnecting felt impossible. Emma listened softly, heart gently aching with quiet understanding. "David regretted it deeply," she admitted quietly, eyes misted gently with tears she struggled quietly to contain. "I never knew how much until today, reading his words, seeing his regret laid so quietly bare." Michael regarded her quietly, eyes gentle yet filled with quiet sorrow. "I regretted it too, more deeply than I've ever admitted. Losing David's friendship taught me how silence can quietly destroy even the most meaningful connections." Emma nodded gently, feeling quietly the profound truth of his words settling softly within her. "It taught me the same lesson, though I didn't fully realize it until today," she whispered softly, voice quiet yet certain. "Silence ended my marriage too, not anger, not betrayal, just gentle silence, quietly growing until it became unbearable." They sat quietly together, shared grief softly binding them in gentle, painful understanding. Emma felt quietly grateful yet saddened by the irony that David's quiet lessons had only become clear after his absence, quietly uniting two hearts he had silently touched so profoundly. Michael opened David's journal softly, fingertips tracing gently over familiar handwriting. Emma watched quietly, heart softly aching at the vulnerability of this shared moment. Slowly, Michael raised his eyes, filled softly with regret, yet also quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Emma, for showing me this, for letting me finally hear his voice again, even if only through these pages." Emma nodded softly, feeling a gentle release within her chest, the quiet lifting of a burden she hadn't fully known she carried. "I'm glad I found it, even though it hurts," she whispered gently. "It made me realize something important, that hiding away from pain doesn't prevent it. It only makes it quieter, deeper, but it's still there." Michael regarded her warmly, understanding gently evident in his quiet gaze. "I think I've spent too many years hiding too, thinking silence was safer, but really it was just lonely. Meeting you has quietly changed that for me." Emma smiled softly, eyes moist yet filled, quietly with warmth. "Meeting you has changed me too, more than you might realize." They shared a quiet, meaningful glance, gentle silence wrapping softly around them, comforting yet charged quietly with unspoken truths. After a moment, Michael carefully set the journal aside, leaning gently forward, voice quietly sincere. "Emma, I think perhaps it's no coincidence we met as we did. Maybe in a strange, quiet way, David guided us to each other, hoping we'd learn what he struggled to accept. That silence isn't strength. True strength is quiet courage, being vulnerable enough to speak, even when it scares us." Emma felt a gentle warmth bloom quietly within her at his words, their quiet resonance softly filling her heart. She nodded gently, voice softly trembling yet firm. "I believe that too, Michael. Maybe David, in his own quiet way, gave us the courage he wished he'd had." They sat together quietly as the rain fell softly outside, a gentle symphony accompanying the tender revelations they now carefully shared. Emma quietly realized how much lighter she felt, how gently the quiet burden of unspoken truths had begun to dissolve. Yet she knew clearly that her journey was far from finished. Confronting the quiet reality of Michael's connection to David had opened a gentle door inside her heart, one that would not easily close. After a gentle pause, Michael's voice broke, softly through the quiet stillness, hesitant yet quietly hopeful. "Emma, knowing what we know now, do you think there's a chance for us beyond just friendship? Or is it too complicated, too tangled with memories we both share?" Emma drew a quiet, steady breath, heart beating softly with gentle apprehension. "I've asked myself that too. Honestly, part of me is frightened by the possibility, afraid of losing the friendship we've quietly built, afraid of hurting again." Michael's eyes softened gently, nodding quietly in understanding. "I feel the same fear, but another part of me, a stronger part perhaps, believes the risk might be worth taking. Maybe we owe it to ourselves, to David, to be brave, to try something he and I never managed, to speak openly about how we feel, even knowing we might fail." Emma felt her chest tighten gently, the quiet power of his words resonating deeply within her. She understood softly, profoundly, that Michael was right. They owed it quietly to themselves, to the silent lessons left by David, to try, even with no guarantee. "You're right," she whispered softly, voice gentle yet quietly resolute. "Maybe this is exactly what we both need. A quiet chance to do things differently, to choose openness instead of silence." Michael smiled gently, relief and quiet gratitude softly visible in his eyes. He reached gently across the table, his hand softly finding hers, warmth quietly spreading through her fingertips. Emma closed her eyes briefly, savoring quietly this gentle, meaningful touch, one she had longed for quietly, secretly, since that first brief moment in the hospital waiting room. Yet beneath her quiet joy lingered a subtle, anxious awareness of the fragile new path they were gently stepping onto. She knew clearly now that courage didn't mean the absence of fear. It meant quietly acknowledging fear and choosing to move forward anyway. She had lived quietly in fear's shadow for far too long. Now it was gently time to step into courage's soft, uncertain light. They sat quietly together in Michael's cozy cottage as evening deepened gently around them, rain softly drumming against the roof, providing a gentle rhythm for their tender conversation. Emma felt quietly amazed by how quickly the barriers between them had softened, leaving only a careful vulnerability that felt precious, fragile, yet gently hopeful. Michael's eyes never left her face as he spoke softly, carefully measuring his words. "Emma, there's something else, something I never mentioned because it felt strange, awkward. But seeing David's journal tonight, well, perhaps it's important you know." Emma felt her heart quicken softly again, nervous yet gently curious, sensing intuitively the quiet weight of Michael's next words. "What is it?" she asked gently, voice quiet yet steady. Michael hesitated quietly, then reached gently to a nearby shelf, retrieving a small, carefully preserved envelope. "After David and I stopped speaking, years passed quietly. But one day, shortly before he married, he sent me a letter. One I never replied to, because I was hurt and too stubborn to forgive quickly. I've regretted that ever since." Emma took the envelope gently, recognizing immediately David's careful handwriting. Her fingers trembled slightly as she carefully unfolded the delicate aged paper. The ink faded, yet words clearly readable. Michael sat silently beside her, giving her quiet space to read carefully. "Michael, I miss our friendship more than I've ever admitted. I'm about to marry someone truly wonderful. Her name is Emma, and you'd love her. She's everything. I admire but fear I might lose if I stay silent like I did with you. If you ever read this, please forgive me and know I'm sorry. Your friendship shaped who I am, even if I never properly thanked you. Maybe someday you'll meet Emma and understand why I love her and why I need to become someone who doesn't hide in silence anymore. Your friend, always, David." Tears blurred Emma's vision softly as she finished reading, heart quietly breaking, yet filling gently with a profound, bittersweet gratitude. David had known quietly, instinctively, the quiet, danger in silence, had seen clearly the gentle patterns that eventually ended their marriage. He had wanted softly to change, had quietly tried, even if he never fully succeeded. Emma folded the letter gently, holding it close to her heart. Michael watched softly, quiet understanding in his eyes. "He tried," Michael said quietly. "David wanted to break the cycle. Maybe he didn't fully succeed, but he left us something powerful. The chance to choose differently, to speak openly, bravely, even when it frightens us." Emma nodded gently, feeling the truth of Michael's words quietly resonate within her. "We owe it to him, and to ourselves, to do exactly that," she whispered softly, voice gently determined yet tenderly vulnerable. Michael reached quietly for her hand again, their fingers intertwining gently, comfortably. Emma looked up softly, eyes meeting his warm, quiet gaze, recognizing clearly the depth of emotion softly reflected there. It was a quiet, mutual decision, spoken gently yet unmistakably through this silent, tender connection. "Emma?" Michael finally said softly, voice trembling gently but firm with quiet resolve. "I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Hiding how I truly feel, staying quiet out of fear. I want to try, really try, to build something meaningful. With you. I'm ready if you are." Emma smiled softly through tears, heart gently buoyed by his quiet bravery, knowing clearly her answer was simple yet profound. "I'm ready too," she whispered quietly, voice steady and filled gently with quiet certainty. They shared a gentle, quiet embrace, each softly aware of the significance of this moment, their hearts carefully choosing courage over silence, vulnerability over fear. And though Emma felt gently uncertain of the future, She understood quietly and deeply that this uncertainty was what made their choice courageous, meaningful, real. Pulling back gently from their embrace, Emma met Michael's gaze, once more, softly resolved and quietly hopeful. "Thank you," she murmured gently. "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to speak our truths." Outside, rain continued falling softly, a gentle backdrop to this quiet turning point, softly washing away years of silence and carefully making room for second chances. Emma breathed quietly, heart full and softly aching with gentle joy and quiet relief. She knew now with quiet certainty. This was the quiet beginning they both needed, a gentle step toward a truth they'd both quietly longed for, yet feared deeply. Have you ever wished you could go back and hold on just a little bit longer? Despite her newfound resolution to embrace openness, Emma soon discovered that breaking lifelong habits was gently but painfully difficult. In quiet moments alone, particularly at night when shadows softly filled her home and memories whispered quietly through the empty rooms, regret would slowly creep in, silently reminding her of all she'd quietly lost through years of careful silence. One evening, as dusk settled gently, Emma found herself sorting carefully through old letters, cards, and photographs she'd quietly stored away. Each faded image and yellowed note whispered gently of missed opportunities, quiet invitations she'd politely declined, friendships she'd softly allowed to fade, and words she'd chosen carefully never to speak. Each small reminder felt like a gentle, persistent accusation, quiet evidence of all the subtle ways she had quietly withheld herself from the richness life had softly offered. She carefully unfolded a birthday card from her father, written shortly before his death, the handwriting, shaky yet deeply familiar. Tears gently blurred her vision as she read his simple words. "Emma, remember to say what matters most before it's too late. Love, Dad." Her heart ached quietly with regret, painfully aware of how softly she'd let opportunities to express love slip gently through her fingers, believing there would always be time later. Emma moved softly through her home, heart heavy with quiet grief. She paused by the bookshelf, gently touching the small porcelain figurine David had given her long ago, a quiet symbol of their love she'd carefully tucked away after their separation. She lifted it gently, examining its delicate curves, realizing, with painful clarity, how quietly their marriage had dissolved, not in anger, not loudly, but through soft, incremental silences that had gradually, inevitably, carved distance between them. Her fingertips trembled softly as she returned it to the shelf, wondering quietly if things might have been different had she been brave enough to break those quiet silences earlier. She sat softly at her kitchen table, alone beneath the warm, dim light. Her quiet solitude felt heavier tonight, punctuated softly by the gentle ticking of the old clock on her kitchen wall. Its steady rhythm was both comforting and painfully symbolic, a quiet reminder of passing time, gentle yet relentless. Emma felt a sudden, overwhelming awareness of how much time she'd quietly allowed to slip away, lost forever to caution and silence. Her thoughts drifted gently to Michael, their new relationship still tender, filled softly with hope, yet fragile and uncertain. She knew quietly that the same silence she'd allowed to gently undermine her marriage could easily, quietly infiltrate this newfound connection. The fear of repeating past mistakes softly haunted her, whispering doubts that felt painfully familiar, yet difficult to silence completely. A gentle wave of self-doubt washed quietly over her. Could she truly change deeply ingrained patterns? Was it genuinely possible to step fully into vulnerability, embracing openness she'd quietly resisted for so long? She wondered softly if perhaps her cautious nature was so deeply embedded that even genuine intentions might fail, leaving her quietly trapped in cycles of self-imposed isolation. Emma's gaze shifted softly toward the corner of the room, to a stack of her carefully written unsent letters, small bundles neatly tied with ribbon, gently symbolic of all the words she'd quietly chosen to hold back. Her heart tightened gently, recognizing in these letters the quiet tragedy of her life. Each unsent envelope a careful representation of missed opportunities, quietly lost connections, and softly withheld truths. Feeling quietly overwhelmed, Emma stood and walked softly toward the window, gazing quietly into the night. The garden she'd carefully nurtured over the years lay quietly in shadow, moonlight softly highlighting familiar blooms. Even here, in the gentle beauty she'd quietly cultivated, she sensed softly a painful metaphor. Each flower carefully tended, yet quietly isolated, never quite touching, just as she'd gently tended relationships, yet never fully allowed herself the vulnerability to truly connect. Standing alone in the quiet darkness, Emma felt gently but profoundly the weight of her quiet choices. Years of caution had quietly led her here, to this softly painful moment of clarity. The realization felt quietly devastating, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true, simple, gentle yet undeniable. By choosing silence, she'd quietly deprived herself of the very connection and love she'd softly longed for most deeply. She closed her eyes gently, breathing softly through the quiet ache of regret. She knew clearly, with quiet yet brutal honesty, that the gentle tragedies of her life were not born from loss itself, but from opportunities quietly allowed to slip away, unspoken words softly fading into silence. Emma stood quietly at the window, for a long while, the soft glow of moonlight falling gently across her features. Each heartbeat seemed softly amplified in the quiet solitude, echoing gently with all she'd quietly let pass by. She knew this quiet moment was not merely sadness. It was deeper, a gentle, poignant grief for the quiet deaths of countless moments she'd chosen carefully not to embrace, opportunities she'd softly allowed to wither out of fear. Eventually, she moved softly from the window toward her bedroom, the quiet stillness of the house heavy around her, filled with gentle echoes of unspoken truths. Reaching the bedside table, she gently picked up her small blue notebook, the quiet guardian of so many unsent letters, and carefully opened it again. Her heart tightened softly as her eyes moved over the gentle words she'd written to David, her father, and now Michael, each letter holding quiet yearnings never fully voiced. With a quiet sigh, Emma slowly began to write again, this time, not to anyone else, but quietly and honestly to herself. Dear Emma, tonight, I understand clearly the quiet tragedy I've woven into my life. I've always believed silence protected me, that it was safer to carefully hold back, to quietly avoid risks rather than risk getting hurt. But tonight, standing in the gentle quiet of my empty home, I finally see the truth. Silence didn't protect me. It isolated me. It didn't spare me pain, it only softened its edges, stretching the ache over years, slowly and quietly. The loss of possibilities, connections, and genuine love. These losses quietly hurt more deeply because I chose them myself, in silence. I'm so sorry, Emma, for every opportunity I quietly missed, every word I softly withheld, every risk I carefully avoided out of fear. I regret each moment I chose safety over courage, quiet solitude over meaningful connection. Tonight, I understand clearly what I must do. I cannot reclaim lost years, but I can choose differently now. Please forgive me, and give me another chance. Emma paused gently, her hand trembling softly as tears fell quietly, marking the page, with small, delicate smudges. The quiet honesty of her own words resonated deeply, a gentle, painful relief washing quietly over her. For the first time, she felt softly certain, deeply, undeniably, that she was ready to step beyond silence, to finally speak openly and courageously, even when it frightened her deeply. Setting the notebook aside gently, Emma reached quietly for her phone. Her heart pounded softly as she carefully typed a brief, honest message to Michael. Michael, I've realized something important tonight. I don't want silence to define us, as it has defined so much of my life. I'm ready to speak openly, truly, no matter how vulnerable it makes me. Can we talk tomorrow? She sent it carefully, then placed the phone down gently, feeling quietly vulnerable yet also deeply brave. This small act was a quiet but significant step forward, breaking a lifelong pattern of careful silence, embracing gently the uncertainty of connection, fully aware of the risk, yet choosing it anyway. Lying down gently, Emma pulled her comforter softly around her shoulders, listening quietly to the gentle patter of rain resuming softly outside. Her mind drifted gently toward memories of her father, of David, of countless quiet moments she'd allowed to slip softly away. The ache remained quietly in her heart, a gentle sadness for all that had been lost. But tonight, it was joined, softly by quiet hope, a gentle determination that felt quietly new and beautifully fragile. She understood softly now. Life's quiet tragedies weren't loud, dramatic, or sudden. They were gentle, subtle, hidden quietly within all the tiny silences she'd allowed to accumulate. But recognizing this truth offered quietly a chance, a fragile, beautiful opportunity to rebuild gently, to speak softly yet bravely, reclaiming a future filled quietly with possibility rather than quiet regret. Her phone vibrated gently, softly interrupting her quiet reflections. Emma reached hesitantly, heart gently quickening as she saw Michael's reply. Emma, of course we can. I've waited quietly for this moment, for us to speak openly and honestly. Tomorrow, then. Good night. Emma smiled softly through fresh tears, feeling gently relieved, heart buoyed quietly by the warmth and simplicity of his reply. Tomorrow felt softly important, quietly significant, a gentle turning point she'd carefully sought for so long. Closing her eyes softly, Emma let the quiet stillness soothe gently around her. Tonight's gentle realization had quietly changed something profound inside her heart. She knew softly that stepping beyond silence wouldn't be easy. That old patterns might gently pull at her again, quietly tempting her towards safety and isolation. Yet she also knew, deeply and quietly, that this gentle risk was worth everything. The rain continued softly outside, a gentle lullaby coaxing her toward sleep, carrying quietly away regrets and softly making space for something new, something beautifully uncertain and gently brave. For the first time in years, Emma felt quietly ready to embrace life openly, fully, without reservation. Tonight, lying gently in the comforting darkness, she finally understood the quiet strength found not in silence, but in speaking the gentle, courageous truth. The following afternoon, Emma walked slowly toward Grace's cafe, each gentle footstep a soft echo of her quiet resolve. She felt softly hopeful, heart gently buoyed by the previous night's brave decision to finally speak openly. The air held the fresh scent of rain-washed streets, and the town seemed brighter somehow, as if her newfound courage had gently altered the very fabric of her surroundings. Entering the cafe, Emma saw Michael already seated quietly at a small corner table, 2 cups of coffee waiting gently before him. He rose softly as she approached, eyes warm yet subtly nervous, reflecting, softly her own quiet apprehension. Emma, he said gently, smiling carefully. I wasn't sure you'd come. She returned his gentle smile, sitting quietly across from him. I told you, I'm ready, she replied softly, voice calm yet carrying quiet strength. I don't want silence between us anymore. Michael nodded gently, visibly relieved. Neither do I. I've learned that lesson too painfully already. He paused quietly, hesitating softly. There's something else I need to tell you. Something important. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken softly, yet remained gently composed. What is it? He reached quietly into his pocket, retrieving a carefully folded paper. Last night, after your message, I found this in my desk drawer. It's a letter from David, one he wrote just before your marriage ended. I never read it fully until now. I was afraid of reopening old wounds. But reading it, it changes things, Emma. I think you need to see it. Emma accepted the letter gently, heart softly trembling with nervous anticipation. Slowly, she unfolded the paper, recognizing immediately David's careful handwriting. As she read, her breath gently caught in quiet surprise. Michael, if you're reading this, perhaps you've finally forgiven me, and maybe you're ready to hear the truth I've held back for so long. Emma deserves someone better than I've been. Someone who can openly express love without fear or hesitation. But there's something deeper I need to tell you. Something I've quietly hidden, even from her, out of misplaced pride and stubbornness. Years ago, long before Emma and I met, you once told me about a woman you'd seen in the town library. Quiet, thoughtful, always reading alone by the window. You described her so gently with such quiet admiration that I never forgot it. When I first met Emma, I instantly recognized her as the woman from your story, the quiet reader you admired from afar but never spoke to. I felt guilty, but I convinced myself it didn't matter, that your quiet crush was insignificant, forgotten. But over the years, I've quietly carried this guilt, wondering if perhaps Emma would have been happier with you, someone who truly appreciated her quiet beauty from the very beginning. Maybe this confession is selfish, or perhaps it's simply overdue honesty. Whatever you decide, please know that Emma deserves the kind of quiet, fearless love I could never fully give her. Maybe now, finally, you can. Emma lowered the letter gently, her heart softly racing, stunned by this quiet revelation. Her eyes filled gently with tears, emotions quietly swirling inside her. Surprise, confusion, yet also quietly profound understanding. Michael's gaze was gentle, yet filled quietly with apprehension. Emma, I never knew you were that woman until the night we met at the hospital, when you told me your name. All those years ago, I saw you from afar, admiring you quietly, never brave enough to speak. I confided in David about my feelings, never dreaming he'd meet and marry you himself. Emma's voice was quiet, trembling softly with emotion. And David never mentioned it, not once, all those years. Michael shook his head gently, sadness softly coloring his voice. He probably feared losing you, or feared admitting to himself the silent regret he quietly carried. He must have thought silence would keep us all safer. Emma felt quietly overwhelmed, heart softly aching at the gentle, painful irony. All three had carefully protected themselves with silence, quietly withholding truths that might have changed everything. Her marriage to David, Michael's quiet loneliness, all gently intertwined, each carefully shaped by silent fears and softly withheld honesty. Looking gently into Michael's eyes, Emma saw clearly the quiet weight he carried, a gentle sorrow. For opportunities quietly missed, love softly unspoken, friendship carefully lost. Yet she also saw quiet hope, fragile yet genuine, reflecting softly her own quiet courage. She reached carefully across the table, gently placing her hand over Michael's, voice softly determined yet tenderly vulnerable. Michael, we've lost so much quietly through silence and fear. Maybe we can't change the past, but we can choose differently now. We can embrace this quiet chance openly, bravely, without reservation. He gently squeezed her hand, eyes brightening softly with quiet relief and hopeful courage. Emma, I've waited quietly, unknowingly, for you for years. Now, knowing the full truth, I can't lose you again to silence. Let's promise, right here, that from now on we'll always speak openly, no matter how difficult. Emma smiled softly, tears gently falling in quiet affirmation. I promise. In that quiet cafe, surrounded gently by warmth and soft understanding, Emma felt a profound yet quiet shift, a gentle release of old regrets, softly making space for a new, courageous beginning. Yet beneath the gentle joy lingered softly a bittersweet, quiet regret. The knowledge that years had quietly passed in silence, that love had softly waited in quiet shadows, unseen and unspoken. Later that evening, Emma returned quietly home, heart softly filled with a complex tapestry of emotions. Joy intertwined gently with sadness, gratitude carefully woven with quiet regret. The gentle revelation from David's letter lingered softly, changing how she understood the quiet past that had shaped her life. She wondered softly, with gentle heartache, how different things might have been had David or Michael spoken sooner, if silence hadn't quietly ruled their choices so profoundly. Standing again at her bedroom window, Emma gazed softly toward the moonlit sea, feeling its quiet rhythms mirroring her own softly rising emotions. She thought gently of David, understanding clearly for the first time how deeply he'd quietly struggled, carrying guilt for quietly withholding truths he feared might shatter their lives. She wished softly she could tell him, gently and clearly, that truth, even painful truth, was always gentler than the quiet erosion caused by silence. She knew gently yet clearly now that silence was not peace, nor safety. It was quietly corrosive, subtly dismantling connections without notice until it was quietly too late. Yet tonight, despite quiet sadness, she felt gently grateful. David's final quiet honesty had given her and Michael a precious, tender chance. Even through years of silence, love had quietly endured, gently waiting for the courage to finally speak openly. Emma moved softly toward her bedside, gently retrieving her notebook once more. Carefully, with quiet determination, she began writing softly a final letter, to David this time, though she knew quietly it would remain unsent. Still, its gentle truth felt necessary, healing softly the quiet wounds left by years of silence. Dear David, tonight, I finally understand the gentle tragedy of our life together. Your silence, my silence, both carefully meant to protect, yet ultimately causing quietly deeper pain. You feared losing me if you spoke openly. I feared losing myself by admitting vulnerability. Together, we chose silence, quietly believing it's safer. But silence quietly took more from us than honesty ever could. I don't blame you, David. I understand you more deeply tonight than ever before. Your gentle letter revealed truths quietly hidden, connections softly overlooked, and a love that quietly endured beneath careful restraint. I wish gently that you'd found courage sooner, that we'd both understood quietly how powerful honest words could be. But I know clearly now that your final quiet honesty was your greatest gift, one that allowed Michael and me to embrace the chance you'd gently hoped we might have. Thank you, David, for finally breaking your silence. I promise. I'll never again choose silence over truth. I'll carry your lesson quietly forward, honoring you by speaking bravely, even when it scares me deeply. Emma closed the notebook gently, heart softly lighter despite the quiet ache of bittersweet regret. She felt quietly grateful, aware, finally, of how profoundly and gently her life had changed, quietly shaped by the truth she'd finally embraced. Her phone softly vibrated, gently pulling her from quiet reverie. She saw Michael's gentle message illuminating her screen. Emma, tonight felt like the quiet beginning I've longed for my whole life. Thank you for trusting me enough to speak openly. I promise never to let silence come between us again. Emma smiled softly, heart gently swelling with quiet joy. She knew quietly now that this quiet promise would shape not only their relationship, but also her entire approach to life. Gentle commitment to always choosing openness, embracing quiet vulnerability rather than retreating into safe, silent isolation. Carefully placing her notebook aside, Emma felt quietly hopeful, deeply certain now that her life, quietly defined for so long by silent caution, would now gently unfold with new courage. Each gentle step forward, she knew, would quietly honor those she'd lost to silence, her father, David, and all the quiet regrets she carried softly in her heart. Standing again softly at the window, moonlight gently illuminating her peaceful expression, Emma whispered quietly into the gentle darkness, her voice tender yet clear. "Thank you for everything." Outside, the quiet waves continued softly, a gentle rhythm that seemed quietly reassuring, echoing softly the gentle courage she'd finally embraced. Emma felt quietly certain, more certain than ever before, that from now on, she would always choose the gentle power of truth over the quiet safety of silence. And tonight, knowing gently and profoundly how silence had quietly shaped her past, Emma wondered softly about others who might quietly carry similar regrets, gently holding back truths out of fear or hesitation. She quietly realized her own gentle story wasn't unique. Countless quiet moments like hers surely existed, stories gently shaped by silence and quiet regret. As Emma stood softly contemplating the gentle power of her new choice, she found herself gently wondering about you, the quiet listener of her story. Perhaps tonight, as you've listened quietly to Emma's gentle journey, you've recognized softly similar moments in your own life, quiet words left unsaid, gentle truths carefully withheld, quiet regrets hidden softly in your heart. If you have, perhaps you might feel gently inspired to share your own quiet story, because tonight, Emma understands softly and clearly that speaking our quiet truths, even gently, can heal us profoundly. Have you, like Emma, quietly held back words you now wish you'd spoken sooner? What gentle truths do you carry quietly, longing softly to share? Emma, and perhaps others listening quietly, would love to gently hear your story, softly reminding us all that we're never quietly alone in our gentle regrets or hopes. Months gently passed, quietly transforming the familiar landscape of Emma's life. Each day softly shaped by the newfound courage she'd carefully cultivated. The quiet friendship she'd begun with Michael deepened gently, unfolding softly into something tender, meaningful, yet never rushed. Together, they chose to honor carefully the lessons of their quiet pasts, embracing truth openly, speaking gently yet bravely about their fears, dreams, and hopes. Emma felt softly grateful for each moment they shared, savoring gently the quiet beauty of simply being together, walks along the shore, quiet evenings reading side by side, soft conversations filled gently with unspoken understanding. Their relationship grew gently yet purposefully, strengthened softly by the gentle courage they'd both carefully learned through past heartache. Yet beneath her quiet happiness lingered gently a bittersweet awareness, a soft recognition of time, lost quietly to silence, chances gently missed, connections quietly withheld. Emma often wondered softly about David, gently wishing she could share with him the quiet courage he'd inspired in her life. Sometimes, she found herself softly imagining quiet conversations they might have had things been gently different. Words, softly spoken, connections quietly deepened rather than lost to silence. One gentle morning, as Emma walked slowly along the familiar path toward the small library, her thoughts drifted gently toward the quiet journey she'd undertaken over the past year. The air was soft, filled quietly with the scent of blooming lilacs and gentle sea breeze. Passing by the small cafe where she'd first bravely chosen openness, Emma felt a gentle wave of gratitude for Michael, for David, for the quiet courage that had finally allowed her heart to speak openly. Entering the quiet sanctuary of the library, Emma settled softly at her desk, quietly beginning the day's gentle tasks. Soon after, Michael arrived, quietly placing 2 fresh cups of coffee beside her, their familiar morning rituals softly symbolic of their gentle, meaningful connection. "I have something for you," Michael said softly, a quiet smile illuminating his face. Carefully, he handed her a small envelope, gently sealed. "I found this yesterday, in an old box of photographs. It was addressed to you, though it was never mailed. It's from David." Emma's heart quickened softly, gently taking the envelope with careful fingers. Opening it quietly, she recognized instantly David's familiar handwriting, her eyes gently filling with quiet tears as she read softly, "Emma, if you're reading this, perhaps life has gently brought you exactly where you're meant to be. Maybe, finally, silence has given way softly to the courage we both quietly needed. I've quietly realized how deeply I misunderstood the quiet strength you offered me. Your gentle patience, quiet love, and carefully withheld truths. You deserved more than my silence, Emma. You deserved gentle openness, fearless honesty, quiet yet brave vulnerability. Maybe, someday, you'll find the quiet courage to embrace exactly what I couldn't. To speak gently, bravely, openly, choosing, carefully love over silence. If ever you do, know quietly that I'll be proud of you, deeply and softly, from wherever I might be. With quiet love, always, David." Emma's tears fell gently, softly blurring the careful words. Her heart filled quietly with gentle gratitude, bittersweet sorrow, yet profound peace. David's quiet wish had come true, not simply for her sake, but for all of them. His careful silence had gently shaped her life, but his final quiet honesty had transformed it softly, beautifully, in ways he might never fully know. Michael gently touched her hand, quietly supportive, deeply understanding. "Emma, are you all right?" She smiled softly through tears, nodding gently. "I am. More than ever. David's quiet wish. It came true for both of us. It's gently ironic, isn't it? Silence took so much, yet finally, carefully, it gave us everything we needed." Michael squeezed her hand softly, eyes quietly reflecting her gentle gratitude and understanding. "Yes, it gave us the quiet courage to speak our truths openly. It brought us exactly where we were quietly meant to be." Emma folded the letter gently, heart softly lighter, yet quietly aware of the gentle, lasting ache of past regrets. Yet tonight, it felt carefully balanced by the gentle joy of new beginnings, quiet opportunities she'd gently embraced, softly shaped by truths finally spoken. As the day gently unfolded, Emma moved softly through familiar tasks, quietly comforted by the gentle rhythm of her life now defined not by silence, but by careful courage. Each quiet moment felt gently precious, meaningful, beautifully uncertain. At the day's gentle close, Emma stood softly at the library door, gazing quietly toward the sea, its gentle waves softly whispering a quiet truth she finally understood, deeply and gently, that life's quiet tragedies were born from words softly withheld, truths quietly hidden, risks gently avoided. But life's quiet beauty, the gentle, profound connections that shaped hearts deeply, always began softly from quiet bravery, careful honesty, gentle openness. Turning gently toward Michael, Emma smiled softly, voice tender, yet quietly resolute. "Let's promise again to always choose quiet courage over silence, to always speak gently yet bravely, no matter what." Michael smiled warmly, gently taking her hand in quiet agreement. "Always, Emma." Together, quietly, they walked softly toward home, hearts gently filled with quiet hope and carefully earned wisdom, softly aware of the quiet courage it had taken to reach this gentle moment. Perhaps tonight, as you've quietly listened to Emma's gentle journey, you too recognize softly the quiet strength it takes to speak openly, to choose gentle courage over silence. Perhaps like Emma, you've quietly longed for second chances, gentle opportunities to rewrite softly your own story. If this gentle story touched your heart, please consider quietly joining us again, because everyone, gently, deserves another chance at openness, courage, and quiet love. Subscribe, gently and quietly, to continue discovering stories softly written just for you. Stories gently reminding us all that it's never quietly too late for second chances, gentle courage, and quiet truths lovingly spoken. Because sometimes, life's quietest stories are the ones that gently speak loudest, softly resonating with quiet truth, just like yours. If you found yourself reflected gently in this story, please softly share your thoughts with us below. Have you ever met a stranger who quietly changed your life? Or is there something you've long wished you had the courage to finally say? Feel free to share in the comments. Your story might become a gentle source of comfort and courage for someone else who's also looking for their second chance. Thank you for being here, for listening and healing together.